Hi, my name is Cass Gardner. I am Anishinaabe Algonquin from Keweenaw First Nation and one of the Indigenous guest programmers here at RIFF. And we're going to do a quick little Q&A. We're very fortunate to have Nyla here, the director of Splashback, and we're going to be really casual and sit here and talk and open it up to questions. So I'm going to give the mic to you. You can introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi everyone, and thanks for coming and sticking around. My name is Nyla Nookshuk. I directed Splashback. I am from the community of Igloolik, which is this tiny remote community, a little like Pang, but very, very flat. It's an island, and my nephews are actually from this community, and I'm so happy to be here and share this project with international audiences.
All right, I'm going to jump right in. Okay, so I really enjoyed that this film is, it has a lot of themes going on. It's coming of age story. It's really kind of embracing and understanding identity and these young girls' relationship to themselves, their indigeneity, the land. But I was wondering, I think it's great. It's so cool that you did it through the lens of horror sci-fi. So I was just wondering why you chose to kind of tell this story through that genre and what that kind of gave to this.
So I really got into movies because I'm a big nerd. I love movies, and in particular horror and sci-fi. And growing up, it's just what I was kind of into. And working with these teenagers, it's like so fun because they're at that age where they're kind of figuring out what they want to do and where they fit in. And for me, when I was their age, I was all about scary movies and making my friends get dressed up as ghosts. And so when this was my first time directing anything, it was this crazy learning experience for me every single day. But just this chance for me to kind of go and back to my kind of love of movies that I watched growing up, Goonies, E.T., but then lots of other kind of scary movies that influenced me as well that I got to play around with, and then kind of explore that these kinds of movies that I definitely loved growing up, that felt familiar to me in this place that also felt familiar to me.
Great, thank you. Okay, so since I've watched this film multiple times, I've been dying to ask you about the monsters or aliens, because I don't know, there's like all these reference points to me to different like sci-fi horror kind of villains, or like the black blood reminds me of the X-Files, like the black ink or something, if anyone's an X-Files fan. And like that mask sort of, it's like the Valley of the Uncanny, and it's so effective when you first see the animals and they're like a little weird but something slightly off, and like especially the faces. So if you could just walk us through the kind of ideation and where this came from.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so much fun to kind of work in the horror and genre space, is because actually the figuring out how to execute what you've kind of written on the page is a really kind of fun and collaborative process. And even that process of figuring out what the aliens were on the page was this kind of fun and kind of creative process, and the form they took kind of changed with the people that I was working with. And so we knew that they were going to be made up of these tentacles, that they would take over the bodies of different animals and wear their skins as disguises. And so then figuring out that movement of like how would somebody move if they were made up of a bunch of different like snakes. And so I got to work with this really amazing contortionist named Troy, and he's incredible. He does a lot of work with Guillermo del Toro, who is based out of Toronto as well. And so he is double jointed in every single joint in his body and can just do the craziest things. And so we built we figured out how he would walk in human form, and then we also built this like full, huge polar bear outfit that we ended up like not essentially using, but he could only wear it upside down and like backwards running down the hill. And so it was crazy. It was a crazy effort for him. It was, just figuring out a lot of those elements was really, really fun. And then the skin suits, that was getting to work with these amazing practical effects folks that built a lot of our practical effects, like the seed version of the ship and all of those skin suits, including so Troy would wear Troy and Ophelio, we had two. Ophelio did more of the stunt heavy stuff, and Troy did all of the movements that required walking, and then if there were two creatures at once, they would both be there together. And so even their hands, they'd have to have skin versions of the people's hands to put on, it was really kind of fun to figure out those movements, and then later in post, when working with our special effects people to kind of figure out those other elements.
And I also really enjoyed how there's a lot of specific kind of Inuit things that you brought in. There's the kind of culture that exists up in the Arctic of, 4x4s and bikes and, stealing your parents' like fishing boat to go out on the land. And I think that another really cool aspect was the use of like the score and how there's like Inuit throat singing and different, I know that you worked with some of the people from the Hallucination, so you want to just speak a little bit about the soundtracks. I think that was really effective as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really lucky to work with the guys from Tribe Called Red. Now go by Hallucination. These really great electronic DJs that incorporate powwow music into what they do, and they took some traditional Inuit drums and created new beats and some really beautiful things that they kind of put together for the score. And then at a certain point, we felt like it would be beneficial to also have someone that was more familiar with just a traditional film score to come in, and so we had someone, this really great Canadian living in LA who came in to do some, essentially would get the stems from Tribe and then add on layers to that, send it back, and then the guys would add it would be this kind of collaborative thing between the two musicians. And then we also had Chani Chagak, who's this amazing throat singer and musician in her own right, and she essentially she loved the idea of like voicing all these alien creatures, and so she gave us like just hours and hours of crazy things that she does with her voice, and that throat singing is kind of a traditional form of throat singing. It's a game between usually two women, and it was something that was banned in the Arctic and rebranded essentially as devil worship. And so it's these, along with our tattoos and other things, are kind of being reclaimed. And that's just a big part of life in the Arctic, that reclamation. The teenage cast, they all, when I told them there was a scene where they would have put on traditional tattoos with eyeliner, like all the girls knew exactly what markings they wanted, because they'd already thought about, if I ever got my traditional tattoos, what would they be? So it was just kind of nice to be able to incorporate some of those things that just are kind of part of our world, and certainly country food and all of that stuff is just a big part of our life. Like I remember even in the I made a little proof of concept, so a short film that would essentially act as show the tone and what we're trying to achieve with this movie before we went out to make the big one. And I remember in that we had one of the girls, she slices open a seal, and like the intestines are like kind of coming out and stuff, and it's supposed to be this a little bit kind of gross, and all the girls just wanted to eat it. They were just like, oh, it looks so good. And I was just like, you can't eat the props. It's just like, but they just see intestines and they want to eat it. And so it's like, I mean, just being able to kind of incorporate some of these things into this story, and certainly working with these teenagers that I've been working with for a long time, a few years now, and they've kind of been growing up in the process of doing this, and just seeing the pride that they have in where they come from, and that's hard-earned. Like being a proud Indigenous woman, it's not something that it comes easily, and they've got levels of shame that they have to work through, and it's just, I think, kind of like an individual journey, and for them to be, and that's really the case for these girls too, is kind of just having to, one, like realize that their community is worth fighting for, and that they actually might be uniquely capable to save it.
Well, going off that, I was gonna also ask, because I think that horror and the value of horror, we've talked a little bit, we did a little horror panel earlier today, so it's like fresh in my mind. But we were examining this idea of like horror and what it's for, and how it's used often as like kind of a barometer or like a mediation on the anxieties that we have of like the day or the time. And so I was just wondering, because you're speaking a lot about, you know, different issues with that is specific to the Arctic and Inuit, and so do you think that, does that like resonate with you, and what kind of anxieties do you think are kind of being played out in this film, or that you're working through?
Yeah, I definitely think that when it comes to kind of personal projects that I've developed the script, it is this really kind of personal thing. My second feature that is that I've written, I haven't made it yet, also is very personal in a very different way than this one, and kind of deals with certain anxieties that I was kind of processing. And yeah, it was I really kind of wrestled with the use of metaphor and stuff with Slashback. I was actually kind of pushing back against it when I was initially working. I've got a co-writer that I work with on a bunch of my stuff, and we, I really did, it was important for me to not be kind of, I knew that just it being an Indigenous community, Indigenous girls, an Indigenous director, that people would see this movie and then add this, and see the movie that's this Indigenous community facing an invading threat, and put that layer of colonization on top of that narrative already, and that to do anything to even tip the hat to that would just feel a little heavy-handed. So I was always like, actually like, okay, how can we make it? Remember, it's just about aliens, it's not about, and then it's like, you know, just different, and yeah, so that but it definitely is, it's a fun way to kind of be able to explore some issues that might be a little heavier, or that people just might not have the appetite to watch, or that you wouldn't want to watch in the context of having fun. So it's, you know, that these are things that I'm, and even that, like, oh, how do I go about making, telling stories, when I think about horror, and I do think about horror a lot, and these horror films, and their ability to kind of, I mean, the world is a scary place, and there's violence in it, and danger, and so it's a way for, I feel like, for us to process some of our fears. And, but it's, yeah, it definitely, for me, I kind of am like, I have to, now that it's kind of my job, I'm like, oh, how much time do I want to be spending either in that trauma, or figuring out the ethics of using trauma as a form of entertainment. But that's stuff that I just, you know, will incorporate, I guess, into the work, or else it just makes me more mindful. And I think that when it comes to what's interesting about horror is that it has often been seen from a specific lens, and so to be able to kind of explore fears through a different framework is, I think, kind of interesting. And even like I kind of say, I grew up loving the Scream movies, these slasher movies, like teenagers get killed, and it's like, and then I think about these young teenage women who it's kind of a scary place. And so then I'm like, oh, what do I really want to be playing around with this world of teen girls, getting slashed? But then part of me is like, oh, I kind of do. Like maybe it is kind of because we haven't seen it from this perspective or something. So yeah, and that's, I think, one of the things about horror that some people, why I've just started to realize, like, oh yeah, this isn't for everybody. There's some people that just aren't would rather, not want to kind of get scared for fun. But actually watching these short films, we watched some short films earlier today before our panel, and there was one about this tradition in parts of Labrador, Inuit tradition of it's like this terrifying kind of thing, but a lot of our stories are really scary. And so it was really nice to see that documentary and be like, oh yeah, like we've been doing this for a really long time, like and it's just for fun, like scaring the shit out of each other. and so like even that is, I feel like, even if it's just in a totally different context, like this idea of getting together and telling stories and scaring each other is, it's just something that we've been doing.
It's a time-honored tradition. I think, like Indigenous storytelling too, if you think about all these like past stories, they also have lessons that are built into it, and I do think it was a way to process kind of like, parents or grandparents, oftentimes grandparents, staying with, the children while the parents are out in these hunt camps far away. And it was kind of a way to pass on knowledge, information, safety tips, which is also exactly what a parent and your child is in, I would say.
Have the time, because you're inside all the time. It's like.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the wilderness, but I was like, the wilderness is only wild to those who don't know it. So that's what one of my elders had told me, because I was like, how do you know where you are in the woods? And she's like, the woods are not foreign to me. They're foreign to you, but but yeah, you reminded me of kind of this idea. And also I think that we don't take the stories like literally. Like I feel like sometimes people like look at Indigenous storytelling and go like, oh, it's like so silly because there's like a lot of animal or like, horror kind of things. Like one of the films we saw was the tickler, and it's like this long-nailed, beast that will tickle you to death and scratch you. It's a metaphor for our symbol of hypothermia, because you get tickled, you feel that tingle and then you expire. So I don't think people thought, necessarily that there was an actual monster that was out there. I think you can read between the lines, but as a child have fun with that, like scared feeling too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And then just like the Arctic is so dangerous. Our children's stories were just that. They're scarier.
Oh, I see the group of
Oh yeah,
up, so
our time's up. Are there any questions?
I was just wondering, it's maybe too soon to ask, but when you did the final cut, did you need to leave something out? Because I was thinking of this dance scene, because you referenced today that this dance has a very special connection with this place. And into this scene, you can see a little bit of some sad backstory to the father, which is kind of you feel, but you wonder if there is more. So
Yeah. There are a couple of scenes that were cut that were kind of more related to that storyline and the father. In the end, I think it, and those in particular, I think that the way the kids, they process some of these kinds of adult things that are going on. I just noticed that they do notice when parents are.
And the microphone's off too. But I kind of just decided in the end, although I felt like it was sad to let some of those scenes go, I felt it, I wanted just to have it be more placed in a place of joy, I guess, and more about the girls and what they were overcoming. And there were moments with the stuff with the dad where I just felt like it was kind of bringing us down when we were kind of like moving forward. And I do kind of Shudder, which is our American network, is going to be, they still make DVDs, which is crazy to me. But so I think we're going to try and maybe put some of those scenes on a DVD. Because I think they did kind of add another kind of level of depth. But in the end, it was just something that we felt for the overall tone to kind of get these moments that were a little bit darker. Just took us to a different place.
Any other questions?
Yes. So your next film is also going to be a horror film from the far north.
This next one is set in the city, but the characters are two Indigenous women, and so definitely it's a psychological thriller inspired a little by Rosemary's Baby, kind of like, what would you do for a career in Hollywood, and then with like this kind of paranormal kind of element on top. And I was really curious about exploring traditional shamanism. I come from a family of shaman, and this, so it's kind of, and I've explored those themes a little bit with some of the comic book work I do, and so then kind of to kind of take it into this more adult kind of horror was kind of fun.
You mentioned E.T. and Goonies, and the skin suit part has a little maybe a reference to Men in Black. So there's a lot of reference to like horror for the younger audience. So when if you're going to do a horror movie for the older audience, can you name maybe some references?
Sure.
Just for fun.
Yeah, I mean, some of the I love, like some of the more recent horror movies that I love are, It Follows was really fun for me, with Midsummer, and I love what Jordan Peele's doing. But it was, with the second script, I was in the process of developing it, and everybody was, Parasite had just won Best Picture, which is a horror film that deals with race and class, and then also Get Out had come out in theaters, and so it was this interesting time where everybody was really interested in horror and genre that dealt with race, and for me, I kind of was like, oh, that's interesting because I'm racialized and I like horror, but it felt a little like exploitative almost. I was struggling with like this feeling like everybody was just wanting to look at trauma, but fun. and so that's actually where the second script kind of came from, and like, oh, what is someone willing to do to kind of get ahead, with this, and then whose stories are, who gets to tell whose stories, I think it's been interesting just to kind of see that there is a kind of a broader audience for people to kind of explore some of these themes through horror and genre in ways that maybe they wouldn't necessarily watch a movie about some of these themes if it wasn't in that context.
I'd just like to mention that I really like the fact that the kids have watched The Thing. And that helped them in this situation. So, letting your kids watching horror films might be the best thing for them to survive in this world.
Yes, definitely. There's a question over here.
Were the actors from Hang or other parts of Canada?
They were from the community of Iqaluit, which is the capital of Nunavut. It's got about 7,000 people. And that was for the most part that they were all from there. And that was because when I first started the process, I didn't have any money. And so my parents lived in Iqaluit, so I would just be casting out of their house, essentially. We went, for the summer, we brought a crew with us. We went to the community of Pang, and we would not have been able to make the movie without the community fully kind of embracing it. And we asked permission first of the town council, and this is a community that doesn't have enough housing for the people that live there. There's a real housing crisis. So for us to come in with a big crew for a couple of months, it was really going to be this imposition. So we had to work with the principals at the high school and the grade school, which were luckily right across from each other. And we moved in for the summer. As soon as the teachers left for the school year, we shipped up 60 beds and mattresses and turned all the classrooms into bedrooms. So we had 2 crew members per classroom. And so everybody had a roommate, and they were living in a school classroom that it was 24-hour sunlight, so we had to like block up the blinds. This community doesn't have any restaurants, alcohol is illegal. So we kind of got these amazing people that signed up to make this movie with us, and all of our meals were served in the high school gym. The kids kind of, everybody was just kind of looking after them. It was a crazy thing to do, but the kids were amazing, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without the community coming on board, because even just driving, there's no cars to rent, so we have to have people just in town every day, like with their cars driving us around, and driving some boats to locations and cooking us food.
Did you always know you were going to shoot in Pang? Because I find the landscape really helps the story.
Yeah, I love Pang, and I had gone there to shoot a documentary about the tradition of square dancing that exists in Pang. When I was in college, I went and filmed a short documentary there with our National Film Board, and then my brother fell in love with a girl from Pang, my sister-in-law, and they have 2 kids, and so they're 5 and 7, and so just for me, the idea of them being able to grow up with a movie like that was this kid's adventure movie that was shot in their hometown was really fun. And then on top of it, just it being like truly one of the most beautiful places I've ever been.
Amazing. Great. And we've gone over time, so.
Yeah, and we were told
But it worked out.
Yeah,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
great. We were told that people might not ask a lot of questions in Iceland.